He cut off both my arms, but I climbed a cliff to survive. 15 years old, alone on the side of a California road, a teenager with dreams of becoming a dancer. In an instant, her entire future would be stolen by a man who believed he could silence her forever. But Mary Vincent did not die that night, and the way she survived would terrify and inspire an entire nation. This is not just the story of survival. It is the story of how the justice system allowed a predator to walk free, only for him to kill again. And it all began on a warm September afternoon in 1978. Mary Vincent was not like most 15-year-olds. She was a dancer, talented, ambitious, with a body built for grace and movement. Her family would later say she could have performed on the grandest stages. But Mary's home life wasn't easy. Like many teenagers in the late 1970s, she wanted independence. She wanted space to figure out who she was, away from family conflict. She'd recently left home, drifting between relatives' houses, chasing stability while holding tight to her dream of dancing professionally one day. Those who knew her then described a girl who was full of life, full of energy, someone who loved the rhythm of music more than anything. But beneath that ambition was the restlessness of youth. She was only 15, and like so many kids of that era, she was also vulnerable. It's important to understand the time. Hitchhiking in the 1970s was common. It was a culture of trust mixed with risk, a dangerous gamble hidden inside something that felt normal. Strangers often piled into cars together, sharing cigarettes and conversation on the open road. But it was also the golden age of predators. The highways of America were prowled by men who hunted hitchhikers, knowing the risks would rarely catch up with them. And so, on September 29, 1978, Mary Vincent found herself on the side of a road near Berkeley, California, holding a cardboard sign. Her plan was simple: reach Los Angeles, where she had relatives. From there, maybe she could build a new life. As cars passed, she must have felt that mixture of hope and fear every hitchhiker knew. Most people kept driving. Some slowed down but didn't stop, until a man in a blue van pulled up. His name was Lawrence Singleton. At first glance, he looked harmless. A man in his 40s, balding, a little heavy-set, with the face of an ordinary neighbor. But Mary was cautious. She wasn't alone at first. 2 other hitchhikers stood with her, also hoping to head south. They warned her not to go with him. Something about the man felt wrong. His smile was too forced. His eyes lingered too long. Yet Singleton insisted he only had room for 1 passenger. He pointed directly at Mary. He would take her. Just her. That detail should have been the warning. But Mary was tired. She needed a ride. And against her better judgment, she climbed into the van. The door shut. The engine started. And from that moment forward, nothing would ever be the same. The van hummed along the highway. For a while, everything seemed normal. Lawrence Singleton made small talk, told Mary about his life, and even promised her a safe ride. But slowly, the mood shifted. Mary noticed they weren't heading south the way they should. Instead, the van veered off course, down back roads that grew emptier with every mile. She demanded he turn around. Singleton smiled, pretending it was a mistake. He apologized, turned the van back toward the highway, and reassured her. But the truth was already written in his eyes. Hours later, as the sun began to sink, Singleton stopped the van. He claimed he needed to rest, to use the bathroom. Mary's instincts screamed at her to run. But she was 15, exhausted, and far from anyone she could trust. Then, in an instant, his mask fell. Singleton attacked. He overpowered her with the strength of a man decades older, dragging her into the back of the van. What happened there was the kind of violence no one should ever endure. He raped her. He stripped her of her innocence, her sense of safety, and finally, her hope of escape. But he wasn't finished. Singleton dragged Mary out of the van and onto the dirt. He pulled a hatchet from under his seat. Cold, heavy, glinting under the fading light. Mary begged for her life. She was only 15. She pleaded for him to let her go. Instead, he raised the hatchet and swung. One arm, then the other. Mary's world became pain and blood and darkness. But Singleton wasn't done. He carried her to the edge of a culvert, a drainage ditch 30 feet deep, and threw her broken body down into the ravine. He left her to die? Most people would have faded into silence. But Mary was not like most people. Somehow, with both arms severed, she refused to give in. She pressed the stumps of her arms into the dirt and mud, packing them to slow the bleeding. Her vision blurred. Her strength waned. But she thought of her family. She thought of her dreams. And she thought of survival. Mary dragged herself to her feet. With no hands, with no help, she climbed. 30 feet of jagged rock and dirt, clawing her way upward, step by agonizing step. At the top, she stood naked, bleeding, and broken. Yet she walked, mile after mile, staggering along the road. Finally, headlights pierced the dark. A car approached. Mary mustered the last of her strength, waving the stumps of her arms in the air, blood still dripping onto the pavement. The first car, a group of men, slowed, saw her, and sped away. But the second car stopped. A couple on vacation pulled over, horrified at what they saw. They wrapped her in towels, rushed her into their vehicle, and sped toward help. Mary Vincent would not die that night. She had survived one of the most brutal attacks imaginable. But the nightmare was only beginning, because the man who tried to kill her was not finished destroying lives. Mary survived the unthinkable, but survival was only the first step. In the hospital, her body was patched together by surgeons. Her arms were gone forever. Her dream of dancing was gone too. But her mind was still sharp, her memory clear. And when detectives asked her who had done this, she did not hesitate. She gave them his face, his description, his name: Lawrence Singleton. Singleton was caught quickly. He hadn't fled far. The van was still stained with evidence. Inside, investigators found bloody tools, torn clothing, and signs of Mary's struggle. But Singleton, arrogant as ever, claimed innocence. He told officers it was all a misunderstanding. He painted himself as the victim of circumstance. But the truth was impossible to hide. Mary Vincent would not let him escape. When the case went to trial, the courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the benches. Spectators whispered as the 15-year-old girl entered the room. Mary, with bandages where her arms had been, walked to the witness stand. She looked the man who had raped her, mutilated her, and left her to die, straight in the eyes. And she told the jury exactly what he had done. Every detail, every scream, every swing of the hatchet. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. Her testimony was unshakable, her courage undeniable. The jury returned with a guilty verdict. Lawrence Singleton was convicted of rape, kidnapping, attempted murder, and more. The judge handed down the maximum sentence allowed at the time: 14 years in prison. 14 years. For a crime that almost defies imagination. Mary's supporters were outraged. But under California law, it was all the court could do. Worse yet, there was another cruel twist. Because of good behavior credits and parole rules, Lawrence Singleton would not serve the full sentence. Not even close. In 1987, after serving only 8 years, the man who had tried to kill Mary Vincent was released. Communities exploded in anger. Singleton tried to return to his home in Contra Costa County, but neighbors protested. Cities refused to accept him. Everywhere he went, people demanded he leave. For a time, officials housed him in a trailer on the grounds of San Quentin Prison because no town would take him. But eventually, he was set free into society. Mary, meanwhile, was left to pick up the pieces of her life. She was forced to live with the knowledge that her attacker, the man who had taken her arms, her innocence, and her dreams, was free again. She once said, "For the first time I'm drawing a blank. Too many hopes have been raised, only to fall." It was a wound that never closed. Mary tried to move forward. She learned to use prosthetics. She raised a family. She poured her pain into art. But deep down, she carried the certainty that Singleton would strike again. She warned anyone who would listen, "This man is not finished." And she was right. Because in 1997, nearly 2 decades after the night Mary survived him, Lawrence Singleton's name would return to the headlines. This time, the victim would not survive. Mary Vincent tried to rebuild her life. She had survived the unimaginable. She learned to walk, to eat, to dress, all with prosthetics. She even discovered a new form of expression: drawing and painting. Art became her outlet, her way of taking back what the world had stolen. She raised 2 sons. She tried to live quietly, but the shadow of Lawrence Singleton never left her. In 1997, almost 20 years after Mary's attack, police in Florida received a call from a neighbor. A foul smell, a strange silence. When they entered the home of Roxanne Hayes, a 31-year-old mother of three, they found her lying lifeless. She had been brutally murdered, and the man responsible was the same one Mary Vincent had warned the world about, Lawrence Singleton. This time, there were no survivors. Singleton had hired Hayes, a sex worker, to come to his home. An argument erupted. It ended with Singleton stabbing her to death. It was exactly the future Mary had predicted. When Singleton was arrested again, the public reaction was furious. People demanded to know why a man capable of such violence had ever been freed. At his trial, prosecutors called Mary Vincent to testify once more. Nearly 2 decades had passed, but her memory was as clear as ever. She told the court how Singleton had left her for dead, and how she had climbed that cliff without arms to survive. Her words sealed his fate. This time, there would be no light sentence. Lawrence Singleton was convicted of murder and sentenced to death. But before the execution date could arrive, Singleton died in prison of cancer in 2001. Some called it justice. Others said it was far too merciful. Mary Vincent lived on. But survival does not mean the pain disappears. Her body carried the scars forever. Phantom pain from her missing arms. Flashbacks from the night on the road. The knowledge that her warning about Singleton had gone unheeded until it was too late for someone else. She once said, "Whenever I hear his name, I go into a panic. I tell people, don't say that name." Yet she refused to be only a victim. Mary became an advocate for victims' rights. She shared her story not to relive the trauma, but to inspire resilience in others. She poured her soul into her artwork, landscapes, portraits, visions of beauty that came from hands she no longer had. Her art was her proof. He had taken her arms, but he could not take her spirit. Mary Vincent's case changed how Americans thought about sentencing and parole. Singleton's early release became a rallying cry for tougher laws on violent offenders. Some states even nicknamed proposals Singleton bills. But for Mary, the legacy was far more personal. She lived each day with the memory of what she endured. Yet she also lived with a strength that few can fathom. The girl who was left in a ravine with no arms was still here, still standing, still fighting, and still warning the world about the monsters who walk among us. Mary Vincent's story is not just about survival. It is about a world that failed to protect her, about a system that freed the man who nearly killed her and gave him the chance to murder again. It is about how pain can be turned into strength and how strength can inspire countless others. Today, when people speak of Mary Vincent, they often focus on her survival. The 15-year-old girl who lost both her arms. The teenager who climbed a cliff with nothing but willpower. The survivor who pointed out her attacker in court and never once faltered. But Mary is more than her suffering. She is an artist, a mother, an advocate, a woman who rebuilt herself from the ruins of that night. Her paintings, delicate and detailed, reveal a side of her untouched by violence, a beauty that Singleton could never steal. Yet even with that strength, the fear never fully faded. She admitted that his name alone could cause her to panic, that his face, even decades later, still haunted her. It is a reminder of how trauma never truly ends. Survivors live with it in silence, in shadows, in the quiet moments when the world is not watching. And Mary Vincent lived with that shadow every day. Mary once said, "He destroyed everything about me, my way of thinking, my way of life. But I had to learn to keep going." Those words echo louder than any sentence handed down in court, because Mary Vincent did keep going. And in doing so, she became more than a survivor. She became a symbol of what it means to endure, even when endurance seems impossible. And so we are left with the chilling truth. Mary Vincent survived, but her survival came at a cost that no sentence could repay. What does justice mean when a system allows monsters to walk free? And how many more lives must be lost before real change is made? Tell us what you think in the comments. And if you found Mary's story important, share it, because her voice, and the voices of survivors like her, must never be silenced. For more true crime stories that uncover the untold truths behind the headlines, make sure you're subscribed to Trendify.